Hello everyone, my name is Bob McCann. Today we are going to talk about delivery for persuasive business presentations, specifically in the area of nonverbal communication and to some degree verbal communication techniques of delivery. So when we think about an overview here of delivery techniques, it ranges from authenticity, which in and of itself is actually not a technique, but it's something we're going to come back to. Eye contact, which is nonverbal communication. Posture and movement, which represents another area of nonverbal communication. Gestures, facial expression, more nonverbal communication. Vocals, obviously verbal communication, and strategic pausing, as well as a variety of other techniques. But we're going to focus in on these 6 techniques and then also talk at length about authenticity. So when we talk about authenticity, the bottom line here, as is expressed in red color, is to be yourself. We want you to spot good presenters and learn from these good presenters and or communicators. Always be on the lookout, whether it be at church or at business or online or on TED Talks or at keynotes or in conferences. Who's presenting and or communicating in a way that you find to be really impactful or memorable, and why? And then learn from them. And then ultimately, you are going to use those skills that you've seen in other people, but to channel them through yourself. I really don't want to underestimate the critical importance of authenticity and credibility. Do be yourself, but learn from others. That's really the key takeaway here. And we'll give you some examples about how being yourself and authenticity plays itself out in different areas of nonverbal and or verbal communication. So beginning with eye contact, certainly there's quite a lot of research on eye contact, and we do know that eye contact is a significant component of certainly presenting and communicating and, a good predictor of persuasive communication. The idea here is to look from individual to individual, perhaps start with someone who, if you're anxious about this, who is a friend of yours or a colleague, maybe smile at them, gain confidence, and to really try to, from person to person, use the room. Obviously, it depends on the size of the room. If you have 80 people, you're not going to be able to make eye contact with all 80, but really do make natural eye contact with as many people as you can, and look out for the feedback from the audience, who's nodding, who's engaged, and really do try to engage the room. Some things to be careful of, or so says both anecdotal examples and the literature on eye contact. Be careful of that gaze to the back wall where you're really looking at no one. Be careful of those butterfly eyes when you kind of go from person to person, just rapid glancing and really don't look at anyone. I've certainly seen presenters that spend an inordinate time just looking at one person in the room or one side of the room or just to the instructor or just to the boss. Be careful about identifying who you feel is the key target and the key persuadee or the key influencer in the room and only focusing on that person. Because in a room there can be many influencers and many persuadees. So really do think about the whole room as your audience, not just one person. And most critically, and quite profoundly researched in the area of persuasion and eye contact, is to not turn your back and spend a significant amount of time looking at the screen where your PowerPoints are. So these are just some tips on eye contact. Again, the idea here, as with everything, is to be natural, to be confident, and to use the whole room as best as you can, but looking at people as opposed to just a blank glaze over the whole audience. Next up is posture and movement. Once again, authenticity is key here. Be yourself, but certainly, ideally, there is room for movement in a presentation. If you are absolutely terrified about moving into the front of the audience, then in terms of authenticity and movement, maybe your best place is behind the podium. If that is the case, number one, I would work on it because it's always something we can practice. But number two, if you are someone who is anxious about moving around the room, really project your vocals from the podium. from behind the podium. Really work on your vocals, because you're going to have to speak louder, and people may not, depending on how tall you are and how tall the podium is, they may not be able to see your gestures. Certainly, research tells us that natural movement, straight posture is credible. It all plays into speaker credibility and helps you to connect with the audience. Some classic knots are the sort of standing like a tree, where you just don't move and you're stiff. From a credibility standpoint, this can the audience can devalue your credibility as a speaker. The caged lion, where I'm going to go off screen for a minute now, but the caged lion is where someone's back and forth, and you may actually just see the person in the screen. This is, again, something that from a standpoint of persuasion we need to be careful about. And then there are a variety of other things: hands on your sides for the whole time, back to the audience, leaning, foot shifting, all this. But the bottom line, try to be natural, try to be authentic, and don't overthink it. If you overthink this, this can really be problematic. As is the case with all areas of delivery, I would urge you to tape yourself, watch the tape with a friend. Just tape yourself on an iPhone or a camera, whatever it may be. Watch yourself with a friend. Pick the areas that you feel that you might need to work on, and work on those areas accordingly. If we start overthinking a lot of this stuff, it can really raise anxiety levels. Again, just as with eye contact, natural is the key, as is the case with gestures. So we're seeing the connection here between gestures for emphasis, just as we use vocals for emphasis. Again, these knots I would be careful with, but there's nothing, I try to look at a lot of this over the whole presentation. So there's nothing wrong with having a hand in a pocket for 1 or 2 minutes, but if your hand is in your pocket, or pockets, worsely, more problematically in both pockets, for 20 minutes, that hurts your gestures and can hurt your credibility. But again, I'd like you to think about these things over the length of the presentation. So there are certainly a variety of knots that you can go through. I won't go through them one by one ad nauseum, but gestures should add emphasis to your vocals. There's some great videos that I'll show you on gestures and on natural delivery, where if, for example, there's a data set and there's a trend going up, the gesture reflects that trend. This is the type of gestures, or these are the type of gestures that we want in good, solid, nonverbal communication in the domain of presenting. Facial expression is essentially to look interested in your material and to convey that interest. That deadpan, highly scripted type of presentation can hurt your credibility as a speaker. And we don't want that. We want you to be authentic, to show interest in your data, or interest in your product, or interest in whatever your message is, and to look interested. One other way to do that is via your vocal tone. So we look at vocal variety over the whole presentation. Again, not just over 10 minutes or 5 minutes or 3 minutes, but over the length or the duration of the presentation. I typically try to pick my spots. Where are the spots that I really want to emphasize? And as I'm doing now, I may slow down my vocals. I may pause strategically, as we're going to see in the next slide. I may vary the volume of my vocals. The idea here is for vocal variety, be expressive in your tone, and quite critically, this is something that I certainly see a lot in my consulting firm when I'm over in Asia. Speak loudly enough that the people in the back of the room can hear you. Very, very critical. If you happen to be someone that struggles with that, A, work on it, or B, simply use a microphone. And certainly mumbling, whispering, and these type of things are things that we can see when we videotape ourselves, and we can see if we do this or not. And then finally, with regards to vocals, we've talked about mumbling and whispering, and to just check that for yourself. But it comes to this issue of memorization. And generally speaking, if you have a script, if you even script something, we're going to talk about that on another video, but if you have a script and you memorize that script, it is going to be very hard to implement a lot of these different techniques in terms of natural, expressive vocal use and communication that we're talking about. So I would urge you to use a speaking outline, which we will talk about on another video, and to not memorize a presentation. If you memorize a presentation, you are really asking for trouble. So in summary, for vocals, vocal variety is the key. Be expressive, use variety both in tone, in speed, in volume, and think about this over the whole presentation. Certainly strategic pausing, as I had mentioned earlier, is another thing to think about. There are a variety of times and moments in a given communication when I may pause. For example, if I need you to really have a point sink in, that might be an area to pause. If I have a complex data set and I need the audience to be able to process that data, that might be an area to pause. And then the flip side of that, sometimes you can pause when you want to make people think that something important will follow. So certainly strategic pausing is an element of persuasion that's worth thinking about. I wouldn't overdo it, but at the same time, I do always pick my moments in a given presentation and think about, okay, where are areas that I might really emphasize a particular story or a quotation or an important statistic or data point. That's when I may start to really change the vocals significantly and maybe use pausing. Finally, we all have verbal tics. So I'm sure if we go back and we look at this given presentation, you could count plenty of ums or whatever it may be. The idea here is not to eliminate verbal tics. Verbal tics or vocal tics are a part of communication. Sometimes the key is that sometimes we overuse them when we're thinking. I have students who amazingly at length sometimes close their eyes for long periods of time when they're thinking. Let's hopefully you're not one of them. But other people and ah and and e and say and okay. Again, this is something that I would try to reduce. If this is a problem for you, and again we can see these by videotaping yourself, try to reduce them. Don't necessarily try to eliminate them or you're going to not be conversational anymore. But if you happen to have a problem where you have 75 ums in a 3-minute presentation, that may be a signal for you that it's actually hurting your speaker credibility. So just try to reduce them a bit. The more practice that you do and the more confident in the material that you are, we'll often find that these can be minimized. Now I'd like you to take a look at 2 videos that we have for you. First, a business video, and second, a student video. And I'd like you to analyze these videos along the different continuum of nonverbal communication that we just talked about. The eye contact, the gestures, the movement, the vocal variety, all these different things. So I'd like you to analyze these videos. I think they're very good. Again, there are 2 of them, so hang in there for both of them. The first of them is a keynote. Kevin Plank, CEO and founder of Under Armour, is doing the IBM keynote at CES. He's being interviewed by Ginny Rometty, the IBM CEO, and actually both of them, this is now an interview on a large stage sort of followed by a keynote. It's an interesting format for a keynote, quite a good one actually. Both of them have very strong nonverbal communication. Ginny, we're not going to see as long, but certainly Kevin, we're going to show you a larger clip of his. He's a very good presenter, someone that I use a lot in classes. So the first video I'll show you is them. You'll watch that for 3-4 minutes, and then we'll move on to a student video. So here is Kevin Plank and Ginny Rometty.
So this takes us to our first. It's actually going to be a very, I think, exciting run together here. But the first announcement, which is obviously UA Record, powered by Watson. And so you'll see the very first thing. So why don't you talk a little bit about, and you're actually going to show some of the very first insights Watson offers here.
So the exciting thing about this is what it can really do. Again, there's 3 components that go into what makes, or 4 components that really, the 4 quadrants as we call it on the app. Sleep, activity, fitness, and nutrition. There's 2 other components that we added to that, as I said earlier, weight, and the last component is this thing called how do you feel? So imagine if you could capture all this data in just one place and have one daily dashboard for health. Because you think about it and go, I know more about, again, my car, I know more about my portfolio or my stock or my bank balance than I do about my own health and fitness. And it's a subjective answer. So if we could only take something from, taking those 4 quadrants, adding weight, and then this last feature that we call how do you feel? Being able to rate yourself on a 1 to 10 scale on a daily basis. that just says, how do you feel? If I feel bright, I feel like a 10. If I don't feel so good, I feel like a 1. And being able to take that insight and take that information and say, imagine if I could look then, and I could truly take myself and allow myself to be able to make proactive decisions about the days that I rated myself a 9 or a 10. Because you look and you think, what does that mean? Because there's 3 ways that we hope that people will be able to compare themselves. You can compete if you'd like, but hopefully you're going to compare yourself against, number 1, comparing against myself. If I have this data of the wheel, as we call it, and be able to look at it on a monthly basis, and say last month that my data, my information, it basically looked like this. And there were 3 days where I rated myself a 9 or a 10. What's the activity that I did leading up that allowed me to rate myself that 9 or 10? Well, I slept at least 7 hours. Well, I definitely exercised in the morning. I ate no more in the MyFitnessPal protocol of either registering whether you had a heavy day of eating, an average day of eating, or a light day of eating. So I had no more than an average day of eating. And then the third quality that we have is the ability to take this information and to truly be able to do something with it. The second component is
Okay, I hope you enjoyed those few minutes with Kevin Plank. Next up, we're going to show you a very different kind of video. This is a video for a presentation in one of my classes in the UCLA Fully Employed MBA program, aka the FEMBAs. This is Courtney Culmer. This was from 2016, March, just not too long ago from the taping of this original taping of this video. And this is an interesting video to watch for many reasons. Firstly, her delivery along the different things that we talked about, such as eye contact and vocals and emphasis, is very strong. But I'd also like you to think about the excellent audience targeting that she does. This is something that we talk a lot about in persuasion and the sort of what's in it for me, targeting evidence to a particular audience. So you'll see some visuals and some examples of this in this presentation that are also very strong. So this is Courtney Culmer, March 2016, speaking to an audience of her peers, UCLA Fully Employed MBAs. And there's Courtney.
All right, I'm going to be talking to you all as yourselves, as Anderson students.
Can't do it.
But I am going to talk about the wage gap. Ready for me to start?
Okay.
So, just about 2 weeks ago, not too far from here, the 2016 Oscars took place. And diversity was a pretty hot topic this year. But it wasn't a new topic, as just last year, 1 year ago, one of the most widely regarded and talked about acceptance speeches was that of Patricia Arquette when she accepted her award for Best Supporting Actress. And during that speech, Patricia spoke about wage inequality and the importance of equal rights for women. Now fast forward a year, and in the past couple of weeks, we've seen her in a few different interviews saying that she's actually lost opportunities as a result of that speech. So what this shines a light on is not only the problem with wage inequality, but also our refusal to fully accept it, and more importantly, to address it. So I'm going to talk to you all today about the problem that is the wage gap, and get you to think about the issue in some ways that maybe you haven't before today. And then what you'll see is that there are some clear, actionable steps that you all can take as future business leaders to close this gap. Now, does anyone know what April 12, 2016 is? It's Equal Pay Day, which represents how far into 2016 women must work to earn what men earned in 2015. So we arrive at this date based on a pretty well-communicated data point that says women make 78 cents to every dollar that men make. President Obama said it, Sheryl Sandberg said it, a number of advocates for the cause have. But there are also some people who try to poke holes in this data point and say, well, it doesn't really reflect the same role, it doesn't reflect the same expertise, it doesn't reflect the same background or even same education. But what you all might be interested to hear is that all of us in this room, current MBA students, when we graduate from Anderson, the women, we can expect to earn on average $4,600 less than our male classmates. And when we look at it a step further by race, we see that that gap widens even more. So what you may or may not know is that actually the highest paid group in America is men of Asian descent. So if we look at it, for every dollar that Sean makes, and to work the same job, Brian's going to make 88 cents. Phoenix is going to make 79 cents. Our TA Ellen would make 68 cents. And then me as an African American woman would make 56 cents for that same job. That's a problem. And I know things like this can be uncomfortable to talk about, but we have to tackle it head on in order to fix it and address it. So you might say, why should you care? And I would say, aside from it being morally and legally, according to the Equal Pay Act of 1963, right, if you're married or you plan to be married, it will also result in higher household incomes, which can help you with rising child care costs or increases in cost of living and expenses. But even if you're not, don't plan to be married, aren't married, don't have children, it still creates a better work environment with more diversity of thought, improved engagement, and many say that also it can result in improved retention. So we've talked about the problem of wage gap. Now let's spend some time talking about solutions. And what you'll see is that there are a few different pieces to that puzzle. First, we need more male champions. And by this, I mean we need more of you speaking up and against wage inequality. But it also means that we need you as business leaders and hiring managers to extend the same opportunities to female candidates as you would to male candidates. Case in point would be the Salesforce CEO and co-founder Mark Benioff. And just last year, Salesforce spent almost $3 million to equalize compensation across the company. So what Salesforce did is they looked at pay across the board and they brought the women's pay up to that of men who had the same role. We need more Marks out there. Secondly, women, we have a part to play too. And we have to speak up for ourselves more, both against wage inequality, but we also have to negotiate better. Columbia Business School in 2011 did a study that said women concede 20% of what we should on just the first round of negotiations. We've got to do better. And one company that's doing something about it is Cox Communications. And they've recently launched a program that will work on training and coaching women on how to negotiate better. Because if we want the men to champion for us, we've got to champion for ourselves. Third, we need more transparency into pay. And this means we have to move out of this culture of being so hush-hush about what we make and the pay in certain roles. And this is pretty common in government. A lot of younger tech startup companies are doing this, and we even see some private sector firms that are heading in this direction. But one really well-known brand that's been doing this for more than 30 years is Whole Foods. And they do this because they say leadership says wage disclosure ensures everyone is being paid fairly. So you might look at the data and see that two people could be in the same role and one might be making more than the other, but it creates a better environment because you at least know why. Whether it's they've been working the job for a longer period of time, they have more responsibility, or they've accomplished more in that time. And so the last thing I would say is we need reform. And that's at both the government level and at the company level. So we see one of our male champions for equal pay. He's consistently been one since he was campaigning President Barack Obama. And earlier this year, he announced a new proposal by which companies with more than 100 employees would report staff pay to the Equal Employment Opportunity Council, broken down by race, gender, and ethnicity. So this is consistent with the aforementioned point around the need for more transparency. But it also holds companies more accountable and ensures that they're enforcing equal pay across the board. So in summary, there's 4 pieces to the problem of solving the wage gap. 1, we need more male champions. 2, women, we need to speak up more. 3, we need more transparency. And 4, we need reform. So before I close, I'm going to leave you with something from one of my favorite ESPN 30 for 30s. And it was on Venus Williams and her fight for equal pay in the tennis world. And what we saw was that Venus carried on the torch and continued the fight that Billie Jean King started in the 70s for equal pay for women in the Grand Slams. And in 2007, almost 10 years ago, for the first time, the female winner and the male winner of Wimbledon received equal pay, equal prize money, that is. It's time for the business world to catch up to the tennis world. And that starts with you all. We need to bridge the gap for equal pay for ourselves, for your spouses, for our daughters, and for future business leaders. It's time to close the wage gap. Questions?
Thank you very much. My name is Bob McCann, and I just want to once again thank you for listening to this session on delivery in presenting.